So, how do you measure something as huge and complicated as gender inequality? I mean, really measure it. Today, we're going to break down how the UN does it. They use a single number to show the gaps in health, power, and opportunity for women all over the world. This is the Gender Inequality Index.
It's a seriously big question, right? Inequality isn't just one thing. It's this complex mix of healthcare, political power, education, economic chances, all of it. So how on earth do you boil all of that down to a single number you can actually compare country to country? Well, the UN created a framework to do exactly that.
First up, let's look at the tool itself. I mean, if you're going to compare countries fairly, you need a consistent yardstick. So let's see how this thing actually works.
It's called the Gender Inequality Index, or GII for short. You can think of it like a global compass, pointing out which countries are making progress toward equality and which ones are getting left behind.
So what's it actually measuring? The GII is what's known as a composite index. That just means it pulls together data from three really critical areas of life: reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market. It's a multifaceted tool for a multifaceted problem. Makes sense.
And here is the absolute key to understanding all the numbers we're about to look at. The scoring is pretty simple. A score of 0, that's perfect gender equality. The higher the score gets, the greater the inequality is between men and women in that country.
So, how does the UN actually come up with that one single score? Well, the entire index is built on data from three very distinct dimensions of life.
And these are the big three. First, you've got health outcomes that are specific to women. Second is all about their ability to gain power and influence. And third, it looks at their access to the economy.
Okay, let's start with the first one, reproductive health. Now, this dimension is kind of unique because it measures a disadvantage that only women face. The index looks at two things here: the maternal mortality ratio and the adolescent birth rate. These numbers give us a really stark picture of inequalities in a country's health system.
The second dimension is empowerment. This is all about a person's ability to make their own choices and have opportunities. It's measured by looking at two key things: the share of seats women hold in their national parliament and the level of secondary education for both women and men.
And when you look at the data on political power, you can see a massive gap. On a global average, women hold just over a quarter of the seats in parliament. You see that 50% line? That represents a world where the people making the decisions actually reflect the population. We are a long, long way from that.
Now, the gap in education is also pretty clear. The numbers are definitely closer here than in politics or the economy, but that 8-point difference still represents millions of women around the world who don't have that foundational education they need to really participate in society.
And that brings us to the third and final dimension, which zeroes in on economic life, the labor market. This one is measured by a single but really powerful number: the labor force participation rate.
And whoa, the economic picture shows the widest gap of all. For every 4 men in the global workforce, there are fewer than 3 women. And this isn't just about a paycheck. It's about economic independence, it's about financial security, and it's about a country's entire productivity. This gap right here is a massive driver of inequality.
So, when you take all three of those dimensions and combine them, what does the world actually look like? Well, the data shows some pretty dramatic regional differences.
Yeah, when you look at the regional averages, the disparities are huge. Remember, a lower score is better. Europe and Central Asia, they have the lowest average inequality score. Now compare that to the Arab states and sub-Saharan Africa, where the scores are more than double. That tells you that where you were born in the world plays a massive role in the opportunities you have as a woman.
But, it's not all bad news. Let's shift gears and look at the countries that are actually getting super close to that perfect score of 0.
So among all the nations in the world, which ones are setting the standard? Who is actually leading the pack?
Look at that number, just 3 1/1000ths of a point away from a perfect score. That is the GII for the world's #1 country, Denmark. It's about as close to 0 as you can possibly get.
And Denmark is not alone up there. The top of the list is really dominated by Northern European countries. You've got Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, the Netherlands. They all consistently score incredibly well. And that's often because of strong public services, subsidized childcare, and really high female labor force participation.
All right, now for the other side of the coin. Because to really understand the scale of the challenge here, we have to look at the countries at the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
And the contrast is just staggering. At the very bottom of the list, you have Yemen with a score of 0.838. That is a world away from Denmark's 0.003.
For a lot of these countries, things like conflict, political instability, and just severely under-resourced health systems, they create these immense barriers for women across all three of those dimensions we talked about.
And that really brings us to the most important point. Behind every single one of these numbers, every data point, there are real human lives. These scores represent lost potential, silenced voices, and missed opportunities for half of the world's population. It's so much more than statistics. It's a measure of human flourishing.
So the Gender Inequality Index gives us this incredible roadmap. It shows us where the gaps are, just how big they are, and it points to the countries that are proving that real change is possible. And the question it really leaves us with is this: what's it going to take to close those gaps for everyone?